am so excited to be talking to Dr. Eric Daimler right now, CEO, founder of Conexus. He is a leading authority in robotics, artificial intelligence, an entrepreneur. He's at the heart of everything right now. I'm Tracy Burns, a financial advisor with UBS, so I all the more am interested in this because from an investment standpoint, there's so much going on in the world. Doctor, thank you for taking the time. And if you could start us all out with your basic definition of, people talk about robotics and they talk about artificial intelligence, and I'm going to date myself right now and tell you that I used to watch the Jetsons and that I actually thought I would have a Rosie in my house. By the time I thought, oh, I don't. I have 3 lazy teenagers who do nothing. So that's completely not what I thought. But there's a difference, right? Or are they interchangeable?
That is a fantastic question, a great place to start. Thank you, including the Jetsons and Rosie. It's also great to be here. I really admire the Core Club and many of its members and what they do in the world. AI is often misinterpreted, but we can take a couple of different ways of looking at it. One way is the pedantic way, the proper way. So if you're spending a time as an AI researcher, which I've done, and when I was in the Obama administration working with other policymakers around AI policy, robotics policy, we would have to be technically precise. And that is that AI is a learning machine, a subset of which is machine learning, a subset of that is deep learning. You've heard about those things in the press. And so we go back up and we say, yeah, there are non-deep learning machine learning algorithms, and then there are non-machine learning AIs. That's not terribly helpful for most of the population. Anybody that's not an AI researcher, although that's true, right? That'd be the accurate definition. The definition I often invite people into is one of a system, the totality of the system in which we participate. And you can think of it like this. You can think of sensing, planning, and acting, and then learning from that experience. Sensing, planning, and acting, and learning from that experience. And that can give the 99% of us that are not AI researchers day to day some access into where this technology fits into our companies and into our lives as citizens and as parents, as we were talking about. So the sensing can be wherever the data comes from. It can be the LiDAR on top of my car, or it could be the air quality detector in my home. We acquire data. In the COVID crisis, we're acquiring a lot of data. Then the data goes through processing. We can talk about more deeply. It's where my company really plays. Before it then goes into, we'll say, the magic of learning algorithms, traditional AI, or the traditional way people talk about AI. But after that happens, you then have to look at where you're going to act. You're going to say, do I move an armature in robotics, or do I change the delivery schedule with FedEx? That's an acting based on the learning algorithm. So it's really sensing, planning, and acting. And then how that's different from some machine from the Industrial Revolution is it learns from the experience. It gets better in a particular domain over time, the more it does it. So sense, plan, and act is kind of how I contextualize AI for most people in a way that's useful.
Oh, I love that. And so do you think it's going to take over the job market? I mean, there's a lot of fear out there that AI and robotics are going to take my job. Is that something we should be worried about then? Because if you're saying that it's a learning thing and it could do things better and consistently improve, especially data collection and things like that, yeah. I would presume that's fear for someone.
Well, I think that there's a couple of misconceptions in this domain. One, we can think of AI as an automation platform. It just helps automate things. And we've dealt with automation. In that framework of automation, we've dealt with automation for 100 years. Right. Things have been automated all the time. And none of us want to go back to doing financial analysis without a spreadsheet, right? And that was a form of automation.
Right. And that's true.
And jobs have been replaced. Few of us have shed a tear, and you certainly wouldn't have this in mass America, those shed a tear when there were many treasury bond traders that got laid off because learning algorithms kind of took their jobs, right? The automation replaces jobs all the time, and it will continue. What's different here, what's changed in the world of AI, isn't necessarily the magnitude of the change or even the rate of the change. It's the abruptness of the change. So the nature of digital technology is that it doesn't work, it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and then suddenly it works at an infinite scale. So you don't have a lot of warning when your job's about to be eliminated. You can kind of see into the distant future, and we can talk about that with regard to career advice for children or your organization being disrupted and competitors just coming and taking your business away. We can see that with some degree of clarity, but man, when it happens, it's very scary.
That's so interesting because, so we at UBS did this report on the digital transformation and what it is. And originally, so that's like digital data, like you're talking about, e-commerce, health tech, fintech, security even. And originally it was, this could take place over the next 5 to 10 years. And then COVID hits and we're all home and the system is like on high speed now. So talk about abruptness. Talk about like tech in your face at all times. It breaks my heart for the older generation who struggles with this stuff, but we have no choice now but to adjust. So it's here. It's here to stay.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of us will struggle with this because anything that was invented before we turned 30, say, seems like something that could be a career opportunity, and anything that was invented since we were 30 seems like it was against the laws of nature. And if anybody, I've challenged any of the membership of the Core Club, if they think they're hip to technology, you ask them how many followers they have on TikTok. Probably not a lot. Right? So it's just, we all think the new technology is weird, right? It's just kind of the nature of it. And certainly the generation above us is going to be struggling with it. In the COVID times, our business had a certain response to it. And what we saw was companies that were rewarded for having invested in digital transformation correctly. And so they had a degree of visibility into capital goods planning, into labor planning, into customer demand. What we did is we've been working certainly with some drug companies and with some hospitals trying to bring data together in an integrated way. But we were confronted with one client we have, it's a logistics company. And I had no idea how big these logistics companies are. This company had tens of thousands of employees. They had a client that had tens of thousands of employees that had ships all around the world, these big container ships. Each one of those had tens of thousands of containers, these Conexus boxes, shipping containers on them. And so the presenting question from our client, or really our client's client, was, where is the personal protective equipment? In our client's ships, containers, boxes, right? Boxes within containers, within ships, right? And you'd think this is actually should be a relatively easy question. Where's my stuff, or where's my client's stuff, more to the point? And in an era where I can go on Amazon, at least back in February, and I could go get a chrome dumbbell shipped to my house in 48 hours.
No more.
But this is actually a shockingly hard problem for most companies. Most companies. Where's my stuff? Where's my client's stuff? Do I ship? Where is the PPE? And then do I ship it to Houston or do I ship it to Rome? This is hard. And that's not because of AI. So this is the point we get to with digital transformation. And it's not going to be solved with your CTO doing a cloud migration, which is often the distraction that boards will hear from their CTO or the CIO. The problem is solved before that, or upstream from that. So when you use the sense and the plan and the act, it's between the sense and the act. It's when you collect your data very early. You collect your data before then you turn it into a learning algorithm, into processing. That whole system is completely broken. The deep dark secret is it's mostly a manual process. If you look at what has happened in information technology spending over the last 40 years, like kind of since the early and Reagan administration, the growth of consultancies has been totally driven by this problem, that the rate of data growth has exceeded our ability to process it. And it's a manual process. It's horrible work.
But digital data is all we're about these days. I mean, everything is digital data. Actually, at this point, can you talk about what Conexus does? Because you're in that space.
Yeah. So we're an MIT spin out. So we didn't invent something from scratch necessarily. We are taking advantage of one of our co-founders, who's faculty at MIT, one of his discoveries in mathematics, which is really foundational. We're used to discoveries in physics all the time. This is the reason that NVIDIA exists, and the reason that Moore's law continues, that the processing power doubles every 18 months, and we consider it kind of a law of nature. It's not really a law of nature. It happens from discoveries in physics that then get applied to semiconductor manufacturing, and then sometime birth whole new companies like NVIDIA that's now worth more than, market cap is now more than Intel, which is unbelievable. And nobody could have predicted that 20 years ago. We are now in a similar time with math. So there was a discovery in math in 1970 that enabled Oracle to exist, that enabled all the relational database companies to exist. It enabled the technology. That was a discovery in math. We're in a similar time where there's a discovery in math that happened at MIT from one of our co-founders in a particular domain, and that has enabled a suite of this new automation technology to be applied to this system in multiple places of AI. So what we do is we enable companies like our logistics company, like a hospital, to bring together in a reliable way, one that you could literally bet your life on, because that's often necessary in certain contexts, bring together data and models in a reliable way, upon which then you can do analysis and then execute business decisions.
Because that's the problem. It's so fascinating. And so I'm also going to date myself and say I'm a huge fan of the Big Bang Theory. I wish that we could make science and math sexy. And you and I were talking before we started, and I'm going to jump to it now, about our educational system here in the United States. It's broken on so many levels. But when more and more kids, like just the screen on my iPhone is science. And I wish we could say that more, right? I could never touch this and find this Zoom call today were it not for science. So what can we do to make this, again, do we change curriculum? Do we get more sexy scientists like yourself out there to say, this is really cool to be smart? Because I feel like we're very behind as a country.
Yeah, we are. That's something we can also drill into. I know that Eric Schmidt talked earlier in your series, and he was also working in the federal government at the same time I was in different capacity, talking about how to maintain American competitiveness. And this is commercial competitiveness. It's also defense competitiveness. Anybody that cares about Western civilization really needs to be engaged. There's a long answer to this, and it's really that everybody needs to be involved in the conversation about what is AI, so that it reflects human values. That's the really big deal. So we can talk about education, we can talk about jobs, we can talk about just how the technology affects us when we're driving down the street. In education, the biggest issue is having a broader perspective of what this is and what's available. So, nerds like me who grew up in a basement, you can tell by my pale skin, right? I grew up in a basement just sitting on computers, and I just knew what I wanted to do. But if you get a lot of a broader group of people involved in computer science, well, they don't want to sit in a basement, but they do want to play with computers in a different way. So there's an organization called First Robotics. I encourage everybody with children to get engaged with that organization. I went down to Florida to see one of their competitions, and they had this competition where the children, in this case, they were about 8 to 10, but there's other different age brackets. They were given a particular problem to solve. And the problem that year was, you take a basket, a ball rather, you scoop a ball off the floor and you shoot it in a basket. And they could be given different problems every competition season. The fantastic part about this is you have a group of kids, say 10, and they find their own little place inside of this group. Some are the hardware people, some are the coders, some, oddly, to many people that think that might think this way, the women would naturally become like the managers, right? And then others would become the fundraisers, perhaps. And the people would feel completely comfortable. They would find a natural place in that team for themselves, and they'd say, oh, I'm working in engineering. I may not be coding, but I'm working in engineering. This came from an 8-year-old girl. It was amazing to hear her say that. And then she went into computer science, but not to become a coder, or she wanted to rather, not to become a coder, because she knew she just wanted to work with these sorts of problems. And she became more comfortable with how she would fit in. That's the context under which I would start to address our education system. But there are many, many other ways we can start to address that, and I can talk to those too.
But you're right. We pigeonhole. If you're going into science, that must mean you're going to wear a lab coat and have a beaker and a Bunsen burner, right? And if you're going into, if you are an engineer, you're probably just going to build bridges. We need to teach people that there's so much more to this stuff. So on that note, what excites you the most right now about AI and robotics? Like, so from an investing standpoint, I would love to know where you think we're going. What's the front and center in your world right now?
Yeah, I mean, I have a few things to say about this. I mean, there's kind of both a commercial and investing way, and then there's a public policy angle on this. It includes education and being a parent. So on the commercial side, I would say that I can be equally, I have a place to be optimistic and a place to be pessimistic. I am optimistic in the deep infrastructure opportunities that are available in computer science. So that's where we play, and there's a lot of other people playing in this. I think I think investors will be disappointed with their returns in many of these applications of technology, because that's just overdone. I'm living here in Silicon Valley, and if I see one company, I've seen 25 doing any particular application of tech. At what the deep infrastructure, the plumbing, there are a lot of opportunities in that domain, in software, in hardware. The place to watch out for is whether these have limits by being mostly consulting companies, which is mostly what they are. They're little tools applied with a mass amount of consulting, and then they'll play around with the accounting to make it look like it was a product sale. That's a place to be cautious, but there's a lot of opportunities in the infrastructure, improving the infrastructure over the next 20 years. Based on this revolution, this discovery in math, I will claim. On the policy side, what I'm really excited about is getting people involved. What I've said to congressmen, people in Congress, representatives, when they had asked me when I was in the federal government, what about jobs? Jobs are going to be lost. I'd say, look, this is going to be as good or as bad as you think it is. And it's based on our involvement. President Obama, in the Oval Office, he had around his room, inscribed in the carpet, the long arc of history bends towards justice. And, we credit that often to Martin Luther King, properly or improperly. But President Obama would remind us, not without our participation. And that's the critical part that I would borrow for applications to our conversation around AI. It's not without our participation that AI is either going to be good or going to be bad. It's either going to be a utopia, or it's going to be like the Jetsons and Rosie the robot, or it's going to be a dystopia like the Schwarzenegger Terminator, right? It's not going to be either. It's fair to say it's somewhere in the middle, but where it's in the middle, how it's in the middle, the expression of goodness for the improvement of our lives, that is up to us. Because the colleagues of mine that are still sitting in the basement coding away, there's 18 million computer programmers in the world, and they want to know what sort of value should be represented in the software code that is going to automate our world. They want to know this. Then their bosses want to know this. The boards want to know this, so the technology is ultimately adopted and embraced, except instead of resisted, right? They want to know what values we encode. So if I'm an automated car developer and I have my car going down the street and I see an object on the side, I think this is a sidewalk, the paint is a little faded. What do I determine that I should do with that car? Do I wait for more information? Do I start to slow the car? Do I abruptly slow the car? Do I turn to the left? I get more information. It's more probably some children at the side of the sidewalk. What do I do with that car? That's a reflection of human values. We as individuals know what to do kind of instinctively if we're conscious and not texting on our phones while we're driving. But those sort of values actually are being encoded by 18 million programmers around the globe right now. And we need to have input into that conversation. And the way to have input in that conversation is understand what the system is and what exactly we want it to do to reflect our values.
I think that's so fascinating. So along the same lines then, I mean, other than us ruining this, what worries you about all this? What keeps you up at night in this space?
Yeah, I mean, there's some it may not be what people think. You know, I'm not quite so alarmed by some privacy or security considerations, although those can be frightening from a national defense perspective. There's some things that I saw and participated in that definitely scared me. An example is in our fighter jets. You know, there are a million parts, like literally a million parts in some of these fighter jets that defend that are the backbone of NATO. You know, what if one of those components then gets acquired? You know, a startup company that makes that part gets acquired by an adversary.
Right.
Like an adversary now has access to the firmware inside of one of the components to our fighter jets. You know, that's the type of thing that can be it can be frightening.
I could see that. Yeah.
That's not even cybersecurity or other such things. What keeps me up at night is people not being sufficiently engaged in this conversation. I mean, it's the competitiveness of American industry, of Western industry, depends on our engagement. And what concerns me as an investor, kind of as a board member, as a commercial enterprise, what completely concerns me is people being distracted by things that are just going to be irrelevant to their success, such as cloud migration. It's like, that's not going to get you to where you need to go, you know, or overly concerned with some security considerations, or misappropriating their resources in security considerations, and not bringing people along in how they just need to behave around this technology. Those are, I could go on around things that concern me. I don't get a lot of sleep.
But me neither, but I blame the kids. But how do we fix this then? I mean, if, you know, you have to somehow get the media on board, because they find, as someone who was in the media for a lot of years, they find their own things to talk about. You know, again, we come back to the educational system. Do we need more science teachers? You know, how do you get the whole country to change the conversation, basically?
Yeah. And I think people can benefit from this conversation by recognizing that computer science writ large is a broader a set of considerations that touch every industry, kind of every occupation. You know, Kai-Fu Lee, who wrote a fantastic book, AI Superpowers, a friend of mine, we shared a PhD advisor, he talked about human empathy. This is something that we can all nurture within ourselves to play well with these automation machines. And that can inform how we might touch some of this technology in our daily lives. You know, it's been said that, you know, we're all going to get replaced by computers. Kai-Fu Lee talks about, you know, empathy as a way to not get replaced by computers. I'll offer something else, which is you're not going to get replaced by a computer probably so much, and your workers aren't going to get replaced by computers, and your competitors aren't just going to automate your business away. You are going to get replaced. Your competitors are going to replace. Your children will benefit by thinking about AI this way, that you'll be replaced by a person using computers. It's not just a computer overall. It's just better automation technology, it's an augmentation.
But that's education too. I mean, that's even in like the factories, right? We need now, we see it now. We got to train people to learn how to use the computers. So it's all levels. It's not even just K through 12, right? It's all the way up through our manufacturers and, like, you know, the people working on the floor. They have to learn how to use computers.
That's right. And so how I will offer a skill to facilitate anybody thinking about this, and this goes all the way up to a board of directors. How you program computers is somewhat analogous to how you can be a lawyer, an effective lawyer, which is, tell me exactly what you want to do. Tell me exactly the logic chain. Tell me exactly what you want to have happen. There is human judgment involved in many of these jobs, but how automation takes place is a formalization of those tasks. This came naturally to the people you're describing on the factory floor. We spent a lot of time building the steel to construct these large machines, and then an infrastructure that included an assembly line. We need to do the same sort of thinking and preparation for the sort of digital transformations that we want inside of our company. Tell me exactly what information you want and exactly how you want that to be processed. from your panoply of suppliers that are available in order to find visibility of labor demand and supply options. That's what's going to serve the companies now as they prepare to be more flexible in a COVID world. They want more visibility. They want more flexibility. You know, there was some big private equity CEO that was on that said, "Oh, well, companies are going to have more capacity in the future." Like, that's kind of misleading. You can't have capacity to prepare yourself for a complete surprise, or to the degree that a pandemic was a complete surprise. What you can do is you can have a responsiveness and visibility into your options. That's what you can do. And that's what's provided by the appropriately executed digital transformation.
Well, I know I can keep talking to you. Sadly, we're out of time. I hope everyone listens to this and starts the conversation. I mean, Dr. Daimler, what you're doing, I think, is helping to put America in the place it needs to be. So I do hope that people listen, spread the word, invest in this stuff, because there's certainly money to be made out there. And we just hope and pray that someday I have Rosie in my house.
Yeah, both.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Good to be here.